Good morning. I'm Daryl Burgink, Executive Editor with No-Till Farmer, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar where we're going to talk about cover cropping, and more specifically, we're going to talk about building a strategy for cover cropping. No-Tiller Cameron Mills, our guest presenter this morning, he has a decade of experience with cover cropping, and he's going to share a little bit about his timeline for cover crop planning and then all the things you really need to consider for putting together a successful cover crop strategy. I want to let you know that today's No-Till Farmer webinar is sponsored by KB Seed Solutions. They are the producers of KB Supreme and KB Royal annual ryegrass seed and also markers of the nitro radish. We want to thank KB Seed Solutions for making today's webinar possible. And we also, of course, want to thank our presenter, Cameron Mills. Cameron is out of Walton, Indiana. And I want to thank him for sharing in today's webinar the many things he's learned from years of experience with cover cropping. Before we turn things over to Cameron, just a couple of housekeeping items we want to make you aware of. On your screen, you'll see a box, and within there's an orange box with a white arrow inside of it. You can click on that, and we'll open up to reveal a question or comment field. And you can submit questions at any time during the presentation. At the end of the webinar, we're going to look to answer as many questions as possible. And if for any reason the webinar is disrupted, or you seem to be disconnected from the webinar, just go back to that invitation email you received and rejoin the webinar through the web link in the email, just as you did today when you logged in. So with that said, thanks again for joining us, and I want to turn over the controls to Cameron Mills. Good morning to you, Cameron. How are things in Indiana today?
Good morning, Daryl. Hey, we're doing good here. A little rainy, but having a good morning. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Apologize for the voice this morning. I have a little bit of a sinus cold, but we're going to try to go ahead and make do and get through this presentation, do the best we can. At the end of the presentation, I'll leave up my email address. If we don't get all your questions answered or get to them all, feel free to email me at any time, and I'll try to answer those the best I possibly can. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started and move into the presentation a little bit. Just give you a little bit of background where I'm from. You can see the star in the state of Indiana, and that gives you a ballpark of where we're located at. We farm 3,500 acres, corn, soybean, and wheat rotation. We just put wheat back into rotation last year. Been no-tilling since 2000 and cover crop since 2006. So been really, really blessed with working through these things over the years. Things to think about for your future cover crop before you plant your cash crop. Things you guys really need to think about, and things we've had to work on in the past 10 years to perfect what we're trying to accomplish. What cover crops are you guys wanting to grow? That's a very important question going ahead of your cash crop. Thinking about your herbicide carryover from your cash crop. It's very important to understand some of the herbicides, especially the residual herbicides we use, don't have a long carryover necessarily, but they do counteract and affect our cover crops we're using. They don't always get along, so we got to think about some of those things. Herbicide maturity selection on your corn and soybeans, whether you want to go with an earlier hybrid to try to get that cash crop off earlier, to try to allow for earlier planting of your cover crops. I'll address how we handle that on our operation. How are you going to seed your cover crops? That's very important. We've worked on that for several years. We've gone from top to bottom on different implements and strategies, and I'll go through those. And then, of course, your timing of your seeding of your cover crops is very critical on trying to get those care of. Real quick, we're going to, I like to kind of mention this a little bit about saying it's all in your head. A lot of guys go into no-till and to cover crops kind of half-hearted. They kind of don't expect it to succeed. And with that, usually when that happens, they're looking for an excuse to fail. And so I tell guys, it's all in their head. If you guys want to go to no-till and cover crops, the best thing that can be done is to sell every piece of tillage equipment you own and move into the operation. That way you have no choice but to make it succeed. Be willing to have multiple plans for the year and be willing to think outside the box. Those things are all very, very important. Um, talking a little bit about what crops you're going to plant. Depends on your strategy, whether you want them to overwinter, which we really like on our farm. We like things to be green all winter, have something to help our erosion over the winter. And then there's things that winter kill out. Of course, you got the oilseed radish that winter kills out. Then you got annual ryegrass that overwinters very well in our area. And that's pretty much the workhorse on our farm and all our mixes, or even in a monoculture cover crop. We get along really well with those. Other things to think about, and you're picking your cover crops. Some like legume cover crops. So, depending on your strategy, you have crimson clover and hairy vetch. Some of those things work very well. One of the things to remember in a legume cover crop is we all hear about the potential of how many pounds of nitrogen they can produce in a year. And most of that is if they're planted early in the fall and if they're let to go late into the spring, to where they have the most maximum time to almost go to bloom. That's when they're going to potentially produce the most nitrogen. So when you in our area, when we kill things, say the middle of April or the end of April, we're not maximizing the amount of nitrogen those legumes are producing. So just remember that and take that into consideration as your cover crops, as you're making your selection. Excuse me. Real quick, I need to talk about herbicide selection in your cash crop. When you're planting your cash crop, this particular chart we're going to be showing here is from Penn State University. You guys can download it yourselves. You can go on and search it on their website. Basically, what it is, it's very common herbicides that are used in our cash crop operation, and they kind of tell how they'll affect your cover crops. And while I'm not trying to smack any herbicide companies around, there are some resistant or residual herbicides that are kind of harmful to our cover crops. And for instance, you'll see down here in the Callisto category on this page, you'll see Halix GT. Halix GT in the post-applied application on corn can be very, very sticky when it comes to our cover crops. We may get cover crops to come up, but it's kind of harsh on getting them to overwinter. I don't know why that is the case. It's probably the Callisto in it, but we definitely have some things to think about. You'll see dual magnum down here. Definitely have some issues on that one if you're going to try to grow some annual ryegrasses and grasses. Again, there'll be 4 pages of this. Again, just things to think about. They're very common. Lautus is very common. You'll see it on there if you want to grow some rapeseed, which would be the canola or the cereal grains. There's some time limitations, about 4 months you need to really be thinking about if you're going to post-apply some of those things. So just keep those things in mind while you're making your cash crop strategy. We need to make sure that our herbicide program match whatever cover crop we select, and that's why we should be selecting our cover crops ahead of our planting time, our cash crop. You'll see up here on the soybean page, the one that's pulled up now, we've got Authority. It's a very good herbicide for soybeans. Unfortunately, it does create some issues in some of the brassicas and the legumes we're going to try to plant. It's a good herbicide, but it does create some residual issues later on in the season. You're going to see on the page that's going to pop up here in just a second. You'll see there's some more herbicides that we've got. Verdict we found has worked fairly well, not having a huge carryover, and that is Outlook and Sharpen combined, and you can read both of those on there, and they work very well. One of the other ones to keep in mind is Sure Start. It's a very popular herbicide. Again, it has a few issues with small seeded legumes, annual ryegrass, things like that. It's possible if you don't have a mature system, soil health wise, you may run into some issues on that. So just some things to think about, take into consideration. Real quickly here, going to the next slide. One of the questions and one of the things that people want to know about is, do we plant earlier maturing hybrids or varieties? So when it comes to corn and soybeans on our farm, we really do not, we don't pull any different hybrids at all. I mean, our goal is to maximize our yield goals, and we have figured out how to basically make our cover crop operation work around that with seeding and timing and methods like that. So really, we still plant our 100 to 100 to 12 day hybrids, and still going all the way up to 3.6, 3.7 maturity beans, and still making our cover crops work on those. So I'm sure there are some guys that will want to do earlier maturing hybrids, and that is quite all right, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But in our operation, we've just chosen that we're really not looking for those options. We're trying to maximize our yield potential. So kind of keep that in mind. Real quick, we're going to talk about some of the seeding methods that we've tried over the years, and the successes and failures of all of them. You'll see on the picture here, we've got a drill and a high-speed harrow with a Valmar seeder on it. We've tried both these. We started out with the drill many years ago. Very effective, does a good job of placement. Again, has to be done after harvest, and you have to let it drive and hopefully get things harvested earlier to get a good stand establishment so it overwinters. Same thing with the Salford tool here. Works very well. Just going to have to understand that you're going to have to cover every acre that you want cover crops on after harvest, and hope you got the window of weather to get that done. And we've just found over time those two implements do not work well in our operation. That's kind of how we got started. Do some thinking outside the box many years ago, as far as trying to come up with new ways of getting things seeded. We did end up using our split row bean planter for a couple of years, as far as trying different things. It worked very well. We were able to plant winter peas, radishes, cereal rye, a lot of different cover crops. As you see on the hitch of this planter, there's a beeline seeder. We were able to use that for annual ryegrass and crimson clover, that it blew it out in front of the planter or down in the row unit, and it worked out very well. But again, we had to do that behind soybeans that were planted early, hopefully an earlier maturing hybrid. And if we had a fall like we did last year where it was wet and cold, that particular seeding method just wasn't going to work out. But again, just be willing to think outside the box and be willing to do things a little differently. You don't have to follow any pattern. This is Ray McCormick's invention, I'll call it. He's quite an innovator in my mind. These are pictures of his bean head and corn head down in southern Indiana. He put Gandy seeders on them so that he could seed his annual ryegrass or his annual ryegrass mix at the time of harvest, which for him works very well. Being in southern Indiana, he's got a lot more time and weather and good conditions than what we do up here. It's worked very well for him. Again, if you're in the south, it's another good way of just getting cover crops seeded, and he's definitely made it work really good on his operation. One of the other, I guess, where we've gone to from all the other type of seeding methods is we've gone to the airplane and the highboy seeder. They've worked very well here lately. We've used the airplane for many years now, and we can get a lot of acres covered and seeding done very timely. The nice thing is we don't have to wait for the crops to be off. We can get all the cover crops seeded ahead of harvest, get that work out of the way, get those cover crops started and doing a good job. The highboy seeder we put together last year. Mike Shooter put it together for us, and we used that on some interseeding testing, which I'll talk about here a little later on in the presentation. And the idea was sound, and I think it was going to work out really well. The interesting thing was last year when we got ready to start seeding, we were planning on seeding all of our soybean acres with the highboy seeder. and really thought that was going to work very well. The interesting thing was is we did get about 4.5 inches of rain right after we got ready to start, and it rained pretty consistent for the first month of from the middle of August to about the middle of September. And so we were unable to utilize the Highboy cedar as many acres as we wanted. It just was just flat out too muddy. So you know, every place has its every tool has its place. Weather is going to dictate some of that. So we ended up going back to the plain last year and using a lot more acres than what we anticipated. Still worked out fine. Real quickly, we'll go and talk a little bit about the aerial seeding. Again, I'm not sure it's for everybody, but it's worked very well in our area over the last several years. Few things I want to point out, and I hope I don't step on anybody's toes, but I feel very strongly about this. You'll see in this picture, I wrote at the bottom, don't worry about the color of your corn. There's been a lot of articles, a lot of magazine clippings, and a lot of people talking about you have to let your corn be brown up to the ear. You have to make sure you get the light down in the corn. And it's been my experience over the last several years that is just not, in fact, the case. This picture was taken in 2009, and in 2009 we were still shelling corn in the middle of November that was 30%, and our corn was still green. Had we waited till we had brown corn in 2009, we would have never got a cover crop seeded. So we learned very quickly that that the earlier we can go, the better our cover crop stands get. No matter what color our corn is, that is no longer a problem in my mind. I think the earlier we go every year, we find that the cover crops just get better and better, and we really feel that it's going to get things started earlier. On the next slide, you'll see a couple pictures. You'll see the annual ryegrass that has been flown into corn. That's after harvest. On the right-hand side, you'll see rapeseed and annual ryegrass that was flown on. That picture was taken as I was getting ready to come through with the combine. And in my opinion, what better carpet to harvest on? I mean, you have a good carpet. You got some firm footing on that cover crop that's already out there. That's going to cushion your lug marks. It's going to support you. You've got good soil structure out there. That's just going to keep you up and make less of a mess, especially in the fall like last year in our area where we were just extremely wet, extremely cool, did not have a lot of opportunities to harvest what we would call good dry conditions. So again, it's a real nice carpet to hold you up and give you a firm footing. Next picture, I can kind of make fun of this picture. I took this picture myself. This actually happens to be a family member of mine, farm, and you know, he's a conventional tiller, and they pretty much rutted up every field they had last year. Unfortunately, they don't have cover crops and they don't no-till. So each one of those ruts out there, you'll see, and they go all the way across the field. And I walked out in a couple of those, and they're about 15 inches deep, which is right where the bottom of their ripper stopped. So you can think about having to go through a fall like that. There's no carpet out there to walk on. There's no soil structure, and they've got a one heck of a mess to deal with coming up for this future year. So just kind of keep that in mind. You may want to get those cover crops seeded ahead of time to give you that nice carpet in the in a rough fall when it's extra wet. Real quick into this picture, you'll kind of see the airplane's really not going to fly into the grain bin. But what I guess I want you to look at is the bottom of the picture. I pulled this picture out of our kind of our files. You'll see the beans are green, and in reality, the beans have gone from that real dark green to that little paler green. They haven't started really turning yellow or anything yet, and we're already flying cover crops on them. That's something else we've come to find out in our seeding timing on soybeans. A lot of guys want to push that back because they're a little concerned about sunlight in soybeans. And what we seem to find out is the earlier we go, the biggest thing that will happen is they're going to be too good. Our cover crops can be too good. You could cut them off in the bean head. We just find out the earlier we go, the better cover crop stands we get. So don't be concerned about your crop. I wouldn't go out and fly your soybeans on in July, but when your soybeans get to that, start changing that twinge of color from that dark green to light, I would not hesitate to go ahead and fly on my cover crops, because typically all that happens is they just get better. In the next slide that's going to come up, you'll see I do a lot of action shots. So we were actually cutting soybeans, and I took this picture, and you can see off to the left-hand corner, the green, as we've already cut a few passes off the field, you can see we've got green. The whole field is covered with green cover crops, and we're cutting them off. And really, for the most part, most of our cover crop mixes we use, base is Annual ryegrass. This particular mix was Annual ryegrass, hairy vetch, and rapeseed. And for the most part, the sickle bar just kind of flexes everything down. And if we're cutting anything off at all, it's very, very minimal. But we've got a good cover crop mat out there that's already started while we're cutting soybeans. And I think it's very critical, especially sometimes we don't get the best falls. So, you know, a lot of guys are wanting to get their cover crops established and get them established well. The next picture that's going to pop up here in a second, we'll kind of just explain what that mix in that field looks like up close after we'd harvested and a couple of days had gone by. We came back out and took a picture to show we did cut a little bit of the grass off, but for the most part did not hurt the cover crop and did not really hurt the, you know, the residue kind of got spread out, and for the most part still ended up with a pretty good footing and good cover crop mix. I'm really happy. I'm going to show a couple pictures of a few things that guys would probably consider a failure in cover crop seeding, and I want to just address them real quickly. This is a picture of our farm from about 500 feet out of a helicopter, and you'll see all the green fields around there, and that's actually soybean stubble that we flew on the standing soybeans, harvested the beans, and that's our cover crops that are coming up. And you'll see some uneven spots that are greener, spots that are lighter. It looks like maybe we missed them. In actuality, when we got down and ground truthed those spots, the cover crops were there. They were just not as tall as the darker greener spots. And so part of that's going to be to soil type, soil conditions. And the other thing it will be from is when your soybeans don't consistently change. You'll see a field of beans that'll be green, yellow, and dropping leaves all in the same field. And those spots that are greener longer, the cover crop's not going to grow as fast as the ones that's already dropped. So, you know, just kind of can keep that in mind as you see cover crops that are just not as even maybe in height. As long as the cover crop's there, it'll even itself up sooner or later, and long term be in really good shape. Just real quickly, I want to discuss this slide. This slide was from Jamie Scott up in northern Indiana. And you'll see the bean field. It's a little bit fuzzy, but you'll see the bean field. And there's a defining line right in the middle. Now, and you got some light on the left-hand side. You got some light green color. Right-hand side, you got dark green color. What's interesting about the slide was the field was flown on all the same day, and the beans were harvested all the same day. And so there's a couple things to point out. You'll see the residue patterns. You can see the brown streaks. That's the residue spread pattern out of the back of the combine. And so you can see that the residue kind of does affect how these cover crops work. The interesting thing with this field and why there's differences in color on the slide, the left-hand side, the beans were actually just a different variety, and they had a lot more residue when they harvested them, and you can see it covered up more of the cover crop and kind of set it back a little bit, we'll say. And so just kind of keep that in mind. The taller plants you have, potentially, the better job you need to do spreading your residue. So just kind of keep that in mind. Real quick, while we're on topic of spreading residue, we need to probably address the chopping corn heads. They're very popular. Guys like the rotary chopping corn heads to size the residue, and that's very, very good in some aspects, but when it comes to cover crops, it can be very detrimental. If you've put on your cover crops already and you come over with a chopping corn head and you chop and put 6 inches of fluffy material on top of that, instead of just knocking it down in the corn row, that can be very detrimental and make it very difficult for those cover crops to try to grow through that as the season gets cooler. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're dealing with your residue management. Apologize, my voice is starting to go a little bit, so I'm going to try to do the best I can. We're going to switch topics here a little bit. There's been a lot of questions and interest in interseeding cover crops, and probably a lot of you have seen this picture. It was in a magazine last year. This is our high boy seeder, and we were doing some test strips of interseeding cover crops at V5 corn. Now I want to real quickly make sure everybody understands it was test strips. We weren't doing thousands of acres. We weren't doing whole fields. We did 5 test strips is all we did last year. And basically we're just trying to see if we could get them to survive in our area, in our weather pattern, our soil types, things like that. So we did our 5 test strips, had very good success. The cover crops grew. They survived the summer, and we got along really well. One of the tricky things to figure out this will be the herbicide program, because there's going to be some herbicides that just will not work in this process. So last year we used a full rate of Verdict down pre-emerge and got along very well. We did not post this corn after we had seeded it. So just kind of keep that in mind. We used hairy vetch in one strip trial, and we used Annual ryegrass in another. And I was pleased that they survived the summer, and we saw some positive yield benefits. But again, understand this is just starting out, trial basis. We really need to do some more research on this. We don't want everybody to go gun-ho on this yet, for many reasons. One, we're trying to gather data that will prove to RMA that this process works, because right now this does not qualify under RMA crop insurance. So if you seed this way, you're out of compliance and will not be able to qualify for crop insurance. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're trying to move into this slowly and see that it works and prove that we can make it work. So just kind of keep that in mind. We don't want anybody to go gun-ho yet on this, but there's been a lot of people, kind of going back to that whole, will the cover crop grow without sunlight? You can see how tall the corn is, this picture. We're seeding this was on Father's Day last year. And very quickly after that, the corn obviously is growing at a high rate of speed and it canopies quicker, or very quickly. And in that, what happens is that cover crop starts to grow and just gets up to 3 or 4 inches and just kind of hangs out under the canopy all summer. It's just another way to kind of prove that the whole sunlight thing does not matter near as much as what everybody thinks it does in seeding cover crops. So just kind of keep that in mind. One of the other things people questions have been is residue management, as far as can we plant through these residues in the spring? How do we deal with them? This picture was taken in 2013. This was annual ryegrass that we'd sprayed out after about 10 inches of rain. So we had annual ryegrass that was, about 18 inches tall. It was just awesome cover. We were glad we had it out there to protect our farms. But again, you got to think about trying to plant through that big mat of residue. And we got along very well. Over time, as you get better soil health and you're in the system of cover crops and no-till longer, your residues disappear very quickly. Your soil health just eats up everything you got left out there. And so we always try to find things that are, carbon, cover crops to get them to last longer. So the next picture that's going to pop up here is what that annual ryegrass looked like. We went back corn on that field, and it's a little fuzzy, but you can see that we had corn growing, and our annual ryegrass is desiccating down pretty quickly at this point. And it doesn't take long for those residues to disappear. So I kind of just take you through the timeline here on how quickly they disappear. The next picture that's going to pop up here is those of that corn that when we come in at side dress time. And you can see we have very little annual ryegrass residue left. It just disappears very quickly. The stand of corn looks very good. So again, these residues can be managed. We can plant through them. There's all kind of tools at our disposal to get through those things. Just kind of keep that in mind. One of the most common questions we get, and I'll just flash this up here pretty quick, is our planter setup. Everybody always asks about it. There's no right one right way to set up your planter or another. This is just how we've set it up. It's what I personally like, and it works well in our soil types. And so starting from the front of the row unit to the back, we've got Dawn hydraulic residue wheels. Gives me a big flexible way to manage my my down pressure, whether I want to. I can do it all from the cab. We have precision hydraulic residue wheels, or excuse me, we have precision hydraulic downforce on this particular row unit. We've got the electric drives on it. We've got liquid in furrow fertilizer. We've got Dawn closing wheels. And then you can see on the very back of the row unit, there's the totally tubular that comes off, and we put just some semi air hose line on there to take it to the ground so we don't get any splashing. And that's where our basically we call it 0x2 or 2x2 fertilizer goes. The reason we did that was basically because with our new John Deere planter we bought last year, to get a 2x2 system from Deere put on that planter was a $50,000 option. And I'm getting to be a little bit more of a tightwad when it comes to some of that stuff, and it's a very large amount of weight on that planter to have those on there. So we went out the back with it. And basically, we can pencil inject 2 streams on each side of the seed trench. It's not right on it. It's behind the closing wheels, and it's off spaced a little bit, about 2 inches to each side. So one of the neat things is, no matter whether we plant in April or whether we plant in June, whenever we come through that ground with the planter, we're opening that ground for the first time, and so we always have moisture there for that 28 and sugar and everything to kind of attach itself to that damp soil, and so we always have moisture there to make it work. So just real quickly, this is a picture of our unit. You can kind of see, some of the conditions we plant through. You saw the taller ryegrass. This is shorter ryegrass last spring. You can see it's not completely 100% dead brown. We'd sprayed it and then came in later on and planted it. So every year the residues we're going through is a little bit different depending on the spring and fall. And so just kind of take that into consideration. Kind of talking a little bit about, going back to a little bit about cover crop selection and rotations and thinking about how to get cover crops established on your farm. With wheat into our rotation now gives us a very great window to get cover crops put in after wheat harvest in July. Where we're located at, we don't do double crop beans very well. Probably 1 out of 5 years do they actually even pay. The rest of the time they're just basically changing money, going back and forth. So we've been working, with Jamie Scott on trying to get some blends put in there, some mixes. And this was a 15-way mix that we planted last July. And those of you who know me, I'm a pretty big guy, so when the cover crop's above my head, that's a lot of biomass out there. In this particular mix, the mix does winter kill out, and it will desiccate the course of the winter, and then plant corn into it the following spring. So, that's another window of opportunity for guys to get cover crops in. And really stimulate their soil, with 15 different species that we don't see on our farm year in, year out. That really is going to stimulate our soil, and we think it's going to deal over long term. Real quick, I'm just going to touch the termination thing. I know I talked about it last year on our webinar, and just real quickly going to discuss, flash it up there so everybody gets an idea. Once you've figured out how to get your cover crop planted and the timing of it, and you've decided that you've got your herbicide program from your cash crop figured out, the following spring you've got to figure out how to kill it. And I know one of the questions I got emailed was if I thought that chemical burn down was detrimental. In our cover crop mix, it's not. I don't believe. With ryegrass, the only way to terminate it is chemically. You can roll down cereal rye and a couple other things if you're willing to wait till they're more mature to get them crushed down. But on our operation, we spray out our inner ryegrass every spring. So just real quick, AMS goes into our tank solution first. AMS is a water conditioner, and we need to put it in there to condition our water. And it's always good if the pH of your water and the hardness of your water. citric acid in our mix is to lower the pH of the water. So the AMS conditions the water, but the citric acid lowers the pH of the water. We're trying to get it down below 5.5. We use a quart of Roundup, and we use a quart of 2,4-D, or if you're concerned about the quart of 2,4-D, we use an ounce of Sharpen. And that obviously depends on how close you're going to be spraying behind the planter, or I mean in front of the planter. So just take that into consideration. The one thing I'll say is, if you're gonna, some guys want more Roundup. If you can't kill it with a quart, you're probably not going to kill it with 4 quarts. There's something else that's going on. It's either not actively growing, or something else is going wrong in that whole setup. And then real quick, just to kind of follow up on that, I guess the biggest thing in my mind to be successful in killing ryegrass is to make sure it's actively growing. I don't know how many articles in the last year I've read where you want to reach through the magazine and strangle the guy that's writing it, because quite frankly, there's one thing to keep in mind when you're killing it, and that's making sure that the plant is actively growing. There's not a height, there's not a timing, there's not a date. It all boils down to, is that plant actively growing? And so I kind of reference into your yard. Right now our grass is greening up in our yard, but it's not ready to mow. Well, any ryegrass is going to be very similar to that. It's going to turn green, but it's not actively growing. It hasn't put any new fresh tissue on it. We need 3 to 4 inches of fresh tissue on that green, fresh tissue to get it sprayed and done right. So just keep that in mind. If you read an article, that gives a height, if it's 6 inches high or whatever, well, just keep that in mind, that those guys probably actually haven't ever killed any ryegrass. So, timing, it's pretty standard. Right in the middle of the day works the best. Don't mix any residuals or anything. 28. We try to keep that all very simple. Make a second trip on those things, and we like 10 to 12 gallons of carrier, which is water, obviously. So just kind of keep those things in mind about going. And basically that's all I've got on my presentation today, right at the moment. Put on my email. We'll leave this up during the question and answer session, so you can copy it down. Understand I do respond to emails. I do those usually in the evening, so I don't answer much during the day. So just kind of keep that in mind. It might take me a little bit to get back with you on some of those things.
Hey, real good. Thank you, Cameron. Thanks very much. I'll buy a couple seconds here so that you can get a glass of water, get something to drink here. I know your voice is struggling a little bit with this morning, but I know that you pulled up the herbicide carryover chart for cover crops, and I did. If you're interested in pulling that up, probably the easiest thing to do is just go down to Google and Google the following: Penn State cover crops herbicide carryover. If you Google that, Penn State cover crops herbicide carryover, I did that here while we were sitting here listening in, and it pulled it up to number 1 on my screen. So that chart should come in pretty handy for you. And obviously that's one of those big considerations that Cameron talked about. We're going to pull some questions here. If you've got any, go ahead and post them. There were some that were posted ahead of time. And Cameron, I think, when I was looking over the questions that we got ahead of time, one of the most common ones has to do with guys who sound like they want to cover crop, but they're concerned about being in a shorter season area. I mean, we had somebody talking about he's from North Dakota, another one saying upper Midwest. It's interesting, of course, where we are in Milwaukee compared to where you are, Cameron, you seem to be quite a way south. In fact, you almost pick up an accent on you. I think you're so far south, but you're really in kind of central to north central Indiana. Yet you're doing, you're kind of not doing so much drilling, after the crop. You're doing more into the crop. So it seems like if you were to, your suggestions for those guys who are further north, it seems to be you're going to want to try and get something established within the crop, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that is going to work. And the farther north we go, it's just ultimately critical to get those cover crops established early while the cash crop is growing. I mean, we started out drilling, but we just didn't get the results we wanted. And the longer we go into this, we just find the better we can get those crops established early on, those cover crops, to give us a footing for harvest and to try to get a good growth before winter to make them overwinter. And I think the guys, the farther north you go, those guys have to really think about airplanes and highboy seeders, getting those cover crops established while their cash crop is still growing. And I think also, in that whole interseeding method, if we can figure out how to make it work, if we can get it approved by RMA, then ultimately later on, maybe north of 80, Interstate 80, I think that may be a real good option in the future if we can make it work. But I don't want everybody to jump the gun and start doing it right now.
Let me ask you about with aerial seeding or with coming in with high boys. Are you limited to certain cover crops? Do you think that you're going to have to seed for to work in that situation where you're kind of broadcasting it out on the soil surface?
There's always a couple that won't work real well. I mean, for instance, like winter peas aren't going to work really, really great consistently because it's a very large seed, and it takes a lot of moisture to get those going. Annual ryegrass works very well. Radishes, turnips, cereal rye, hairy vetch, things like that. We've done all those aerially applied, and I think as long as you get a rain on them, those all pretty well work. No problems.
Yeah, I thought it was really neat that you did talk about the interseeding because that is something we're starting to see. And I think the one thing, it seems like one of the biggest obstacles with that, because you could broadcast them, come in and broadcast them, or we're seeing now that interseeder drill that's been created by Penn State, that you can actually, you can use that for drilling soybeans or perhaps drilling wheat, but you can turn around and lift units up and actually go in between corn rows and drill in a cover crop, probably at more around side dress time. But the biggest, again, I think it's good for you to talk a little bit about some of the options. If you're going to try that route and you're going to try and do something like that, carryover, your herbicide program is probably going to be a real big consideration, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, obviously we learned originally from the guys in Quebec, Canada, that we've been working on that for the last 5 years, and they're either, most of those guys are either in a glyphosate type scenario, or they're using like Verdict herbicide, and that's what we did last year. It really does limit what you can do, and obviously it all has to be done before you seed, because after you seed, you really just can't come back in with anything.
Okay. If you are a farmer who's in a situation, I know you talked about with hybrids and varieties, you haven't gone to shorter season ones in your situation, probably because you're doing some aerial seeding and experimenting with the high boy too and doing that. But have you had any conversations, or when you were investigating this, did you consider the option of possibly going to a shorter season corn hybrid, particularly if you're a guy who really wants to try and get that cover crop in with a drill or an air seeder after the harvest? Is that something that you think is a viable alternative to go to a shorter season type of hybrid or variety?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does have a place in a guy's operation potentially. It depends what his goals are. I mean, if he's determined he's going to drill his cover crop, then definitely going to have to work on getting earlier hybrids, early varieties of soybeans. I mean, last year we had a test plot where we had, a bunch of different cover crops. We put out some 2-4 soybeans to try to get them off early so we get it drilled, and even planted them first. And so even with that, though, we didn't get them harvested until September the 15th. So it wasn't like we gained, a month earlier, of timing as far as harvest goes. So we've investigated it. Of course, we're, very cost effective as far as we're cost sensitive. As far as if we're going to give up too many bushels, we want to make sure we can figure out how to maximize our cash crop and incorporate our cover crops at the same time, and that's kind of why we've just gone away from the drill. Not that it didn't work, it just timing was all off.
Mm-hmm. We had a question here about whether you prefer to plant into a killed cover crop or into a living green cover. I don't know if you had much experience with planting into a living green cover crop.
We planted soybeans into a living cover crop and then killed it, and we've got along fine. It really just depends on the year. One of the things I guess I should clarify is we are 100% non-GMO corn and have been going on. This is our 5th year. So typically going into planting our corn, we like to spray our cover crop out to start with. That way, if we do have a problem, we could go in and clean it up in the pre-emerge scenario. Because really, once our cash crop comes up, there's no glyphosate or anything like that used anymore. So that I guess in soybeans we still raise a few Roundup Ready soybeans. So we have that option to go and spray it out, But for the most part, we try to kill our cover crops ahead of time.
Okay. Have you, when you went to cover crops, did you adjust your nutrient application or your fertility program at all as far as when you're applying?
Yeah, we really did, and it's been an ever evolving thing, and it doesn't necessarily. I'm not sure it was all relative to just using cover crops. I mean, we obviously learn something new every year, and so we've been adjusting things as we go. We've gone to using a lot of chicken manure, dried chicken manure that we're spreading on top of our cover crops, and so that has worked out well. But as far as our P and K, when we're spreading potash and DAP, we've gone to not doing any of that till springtime. We like to not try to lose any of that over the course of the winter, so we try to do that just before planting. We think the cover crop helps us, keep that keep it around. I mean, you can put it on the fall as long as if you got a cover crop out there growing to take it up, it's gonna hold it for the next year.
Okay. This one's asking when it comes to when you're terminating your cover crop, why you wouldn't put UAN with your cover crop termination solution.
Okay, so I said that we wouldn't put UAN 28 or residual herbicides in, and the biggest reason is for if you burn the tissue of that cover crop plant, we'll just use ryegrass for instance. If you burn the leaves of the leaves on that plant, you don't allow the glyphosate to get translocated into that plant, and then it doesn't obviously translocate all the way down to the bottom roots. And so if you burn that tissue, you're not going to get the uptake of the glyphosate, and then excuse me, then you're just flat out not going to get a good kill. We've guys have tried to use gramoxone in the past. Of course, that burns the top of the plant off, and it would be very similar to the UAN, but it doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to kill that annual ryegrass plant, and it may just come back, and that just kind of defeats the whole purpose.
Okay. Have you had any like early seed set as a problem with any of the cover crops you use?
Any seed set?
Yeah, early seed set, or probably the cover crop setting seed early on you that you really don't want to see happen. I don't know if you run any problems with that.
Oh no, no, we really haven't. We've had some issues where we get rained out in the spring and don't get things sprayed maybe as early as we want, but even then we really haven't had any problems. We've let some cereal rye go to head or close to head, and then gone in and planted into it. And again, never had any really issues with it.
Okay. And then you talked about you've gotten some wheat back into your rotation. Are you using a drill to put in your cover crop after the wheat comes off?
Yes, we are. At that time of the year, there's the best method probably in the heat of the year is to get it in the ground, in that wheat straw. If some of the seeds that we're using, some of those mixes, if you can imagine what bird seed looks like, it kind of looks like that, all different sizes from small to large. And so it worked. Some of those larger seeded cover crops in that mix probably really need to have good seed to soil contact, and so that's why we're using a drill at that point.
Okay. Have you done anything specifically with your combines to better spread residue?
Yeah, we have worked. We've worked a lot on trying to get the tailboards, up all the way. We've made some modifications. The newer power tailboards now that you can adjust on the fly, they're hydraulically spread. They do a really good job of spreading those. It's just like everything. The bigger the bean head gets, the harder it is to spread that residue evenly. We're up to 40-foot drapers now, and it is a challenge. And depending on the height of that residue, it definitely is a concern that we have to try to get that to spread evenly, at least in soybean harvest.
Okay. Have you ever done any work with cereal rye? I know some guys quite often let it grow pretty tall. I mean, I've seen it 6 feet taller. So I don't know if you've had any experience with that as far as, and if you did, if you found any issues planting at a certain height, that you might have the cereal rye at.
Like I said, we've let some cereal rye get up to just right at about head time. It wasn't necessarily the plan for that year, but it just the cereal rye was growing so rapid and it was wet and we couldn't spray and we were planting soybeans into it. So that particular year we just went in and actually planted the soybeans while the cereal rye was still standing because it was sucking moisture up still. And so we planted it and then came in and sprayed it afterwards because we were concerned that as wet of a year as we had, if we went ahead and had sprayed it and it fell down and continued to rain, we may have had an issue with trapping too much moisture. So we went ahead and planted into a green, and it worked out good that particular year.
Okay. A couple cost questions came up. If you're flying in a cover crop, what's a kind of a typical price per acre for that service?
So so in our area applicators are $10 an acre and 10 cents a pound. So if you're flying on annual ryegrass at 25 pounds to the acre, it costs about $12.50 an acre to fly on annual ryegrass. That's for the cost of the plane.
Okay. And then, of course, that 15-way mix got people's attention too. How much did that cost per acre to do that 15-way mix that you did?
Well, it's not cheap. I'm not going to deny that. It's about $45 an acre to drill that on, for the seed cost. The interesting thing about that is there's so many different species and legumes in that whole deal. And I can't take credit for designing that mix. Jamie Scott is the one that designed that mix, but we've been looking at it with him, trying to decide if that's what we like. But it's got a lot of potential. I think getting some extreme diversity in our soils, especially if you're in the corn soybean rotation, bringing wheat into the mix adds a lot more diversity. You bring in 15 different species we don't see. That's a lot of different interesting things that's going to happen to our soil.
I think it's interesting that the cost aspect, and that's obviously one of the big questions, probably as you go into planning. But for example, one person asked, "How do we pay for the cost of cover crops?" And another one asked, "Is there any type of mathematical spreadsheet or cost return way that can help you decide which covers or blends are most beneficial?" How do you manage the cost aspect and determine the return on investment to justify using a cover crop? What's kind of your financial considerations, I guess, in this?
Well, so we've been running tests for years on our farms, just different ways of us looking at things. And we've looked at it from a whole different host of things, from just straight out, does it increase yield? Does it help us? Do we make more bushels? Which, in all honesty, that's the wrong way to look at things. We need to look at rate of return and not look at in the word bushels. But we run nutrient scavenging test where we actually go out and check the cover crops. We check the soil and we see what we're scavenging, what's left behind, what we're retaining. We've looked at it from an erosion standpoint, and things like that. So there's all different kinds of ways to look at it. If you look at increased organic matter and you can put a value on organic matter, I mean, you can find those diagrams or those, breakdowns on the internet. So we've looked at it from a whole host of different ways on our farm. And, I think at the No-Till conference, I actually shared those nutrient recycling things that we saw. And when we were looking at those, we were seeing anywhere from $50 to $100 an acre in value that we were bringing back into our operation with just using cover crops, looking from that aspect. Obviously, that's different every year depending on the weather pattern, but from my point of view, everybody's got to look at their own data. They have to run their own tests. I can look at my data and give a value for what I think it is, but everybody's going to have to come up with their own values as far as what they think it's worth.
Sure. Do you have any cattle or anything at all, Cameron?
Yeah, we have a couple we eat, but that's about it.
Okay. So there's been a few questions asked about, incorporating livestock into an operation using cover crops. So, and I don't know if you've had any experience setting your cattle out to graze on your cover crops, or whether you've got any views on, whether that's a good practice with utilizing livestock and cover crops.
Well, yeah, we don't have a lot of experience in that field, but I mean, there's definitely, if you already have the cattle, or if in the livestock sector, I mean, it's a great way to get some extra feed value on your out of your cover crops for your cattle. I mean, it's a great scenario. There's a lot of people that are really doing a good job with that, and I think if you're really into that, I think it's a good thing. We just don't have the ability to do that right now in our operation.
Okay. When you've used a drill in your operation, have you had to make any changes to plates at all? The question that I got here was, and this guy's specifically referring to a Kinze 15-inch planter that he's using for cover crop seeding. He wants to know whether he needs to make any changes to plates or sprockets. Have you, in your experience with your drill, have you had to do make any changes to that drill to accommodate cover cropping?
So as far as when we use a drill, we don't have to make any changes. We've used a 750 John Deere no-till drill and never had any problems. I mean, you just get the rate right and it's not a problem. As far as the Kinze split row planter, we use the John Deere one in our operation, and we've made it work. And so we use the soybean plate for winter peas. Kinze would be the same way. We used a high rate sorghum seed plate for seeding radishes. And again, that would be the same for Kinze. John, I know Kinze makes a wheat plate, and that would work for cereal rye. I know John Deere does not, but we found a guy in northeastern Indiana that actually makes John Deere wheat plates, and got hooked up with him. And so, yeah, we had to figure out different plates for different seeds that we, cover crops that we wanted to use. But it's not really that difficult once you kind of figure that out. The sprocket setting, you just look at how many seeds per pound are in the cover crops. You kind of have to do some back figuring in your book, because there'll be some rates for high sorghum rates and soybeans and things, and so you kind of get a baseline out of those cash crops, and then just back figure to your cover crop. It's not that hard.
Okay. We've got just a couple more questions here, and like I said, if we don't get to some of the questions, we've gotten through most of them. If we don't get through all of them, we're going to kick those back to Cameron. He'll answer, and we'll get those back out with the archived webinar when that goes up. But a couple of questions yet on interseeding. Have you got a pretty good feel from your experiment what the range of growth stage of the corn, let's say you're interseeding into corn, what would be the growth stage that you think that corn ought to be at, for interseeding? What works? What do you think might work best?
Well, I do have a range. I think we've got to get it on somewhere in that V3 to V6 range. I mean, like I said, we did a V5 last year. You get much later than that, I'm afraid that if the corn gets growing real fast and you miss a rain, it's going to be difficult to maybe get that cover crop established like you want as quick as you want. The other side of that coin is if you go real early, you're liable to have a lot of cover crops growing when your corn's very short. So I think there's a fine line there. Again, it's going to boil back to your area and guys that are going to want to try to do this down south, say Kentucky versus guys that are going to be up in Iowa, Wisconsin, different places. The timing's all going to be different, and that's what's going to be so critical about running trials is to see what's going to work in each area. So, the guys in Quebec that we were trying to learn off of kind of gave us a baseline, but we're going to have to figure things out down here because it's not going to be exactly the same. And so that's why we're trying to get everybody to work into this very, very slowly so that it's a viable option in the future. But I think V4, V5 is going to be a pretty consistent timing, I think.
If you were doing twin row corn, how would that impact your interseeding, do you think?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, we've seen the narrow road corn with aerial application, and it works just fine. So I don't believe it'll be an issue.
Yeah. Okay. One last question here, and this one often comes up too, is why do you prefer perhaps using annual ryegrass over cereal rye?
Well, that's a good question, and a very simple one for me. I mean, when we first started using cover crops, we split a 100-acre field with annual ryegrass and cereal rye, and so we just watched it all year long. And annual ryegrass, again, in my opinion, on my farm, just has a little better rooting structure. I really like the depth, the rooting structure, the way that plant works on my operation. In the springtime, when annual ryegrass comes out, it gives me a larger window in the spring to kill it. It's not as explosively growing like cereal rye is. I mean, cereal rye, greens up very fast and takes off to the races. I really don't like cereal rye ahead of corn. I just think there's some things there that I don't really like what it does planting corn into it. Soybeans doesn't bother me, but annual ryegrass, I can do whatever I want. If I get it seeded, get it growing, I can plant corn and soybeans into it very effectively. It does a very good job on our operation. The other thing that I like is annual ryegrass in our operation. It's a little cheaper to seed, whether it be with the plain or the high boy seeder. I'm putting a smaller volume of product on, and it's more cost effective than cereal rye.
All right. Cameron, thank you very much. I know I'm struggling a little bit with your voice today and your sinuses, but you did a great job on it. I appreciate you doing this. And before we conclude here, just a heads up that when you log off today, there's going to be a questionnaire we're going to ask you to complete, really a simple, easy one, a small number of questions, and it always helps us determine the value of today's webinar and really plan for future ones. And then second, we will be making available via email to you a replay of today's webinar. In the event you'd like to go back and review the entire presentation or even just parts of the presentation. And that webinar is also going to go up on our No-Till Farmer website shortly. So you'll find an archive section there of past webinars that you can listen to at any time. And again, any questions we didn't get to this morning, which there weren't too many, we're going to share those back with Cameron to answer. And we'll also make those available with the archived webinar. So as you saw, Cameron left his email address up there. Feel free to send him any questions you might have as well via email. So again, hey, thank you. Big thanks to Cameron for leading today's presentation. Also want to thank Wayne Kaiser, Nick Bowers over at KB Seed Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar. And also want to lend my thanks to Cole Vandermouse here in the office, who was our producer for today's webinar. So a big thank you to you guys for joining us, and certainly hope you have a successful no-till planting season this spring, and we look forward to having you join us at a future webinar. Goodbye for now.